I think the one thing we've learned from that discussion is we could allow more time per topic. But we're going to reassemble now and switch gears a little bit and talk about this focus area we have on customer service. I think the hardest role I will again have in this portion of the meeting is being time cop. Because any one of the areas we're going to talk about, both the specific case studies and the whole issue of customer service, is one that frankly could cover vast quantities of time and where we could benefit greatly from the input today. So with apologies, at some point we will cut each of the cases off. But again, let me urge everybody, my PMAB colleagues, my PMC colleagues, the goal is conversation, not presentation. So it'd be great to benefit from things here, and I can also attest that we can find ways to follow up after, because I'm sure there will be more ideas and suggestions, and in my mind this is the start of a dialogue around this, not the end. So with that, let me turn it over to Lisa and Carolyn, who have both graciously, and we are very grateful truly to the two of them for taking the lead on our cross-agency priority goal around customer service. It is one of the core elements of the President's management agenda. It is something that the President and the administration cares about deeply, and we have made it a focus today because of its criticality, its importance, and the opportunity that we are trying to take from all aspects of our dialogue to learn more about this and hold ourselves to a really high bar. So with that, Carolyn and Lisa.
Thanks, Beth. So the goal of the customer service goal is to create a better match between the customer expectations that Beth described earlier and the delivery of federal services and products and the ways the federal government interfaces with citizens. So in a couple of years, we'd like to see tangible improvement in how we have better met customer expectations. So Carolyn's going to talk more about the specific goal itself and what we're trying to achieve, and I'm just going to give a little bit of context. If you turn to slide 36 in your packets, you can see a set of questions that we've outlined in terms of where we'd like to get your input. The first two categories, I think, are broad, about how we establish a customer service culture. How do you think about continuous improvement and innovation and inculcate an organization with those kind of theories? And then how do you think about measurement and standards and trying to think about, as Dan put it, the scale and scope of the federal government and developing some principles or ways of doing this across a huge enterprise. And then we have three specific areas with case studies that Beth described. So motivating the front line and thinking about a dispersed workforce. We have Joe Salvatore here who's going to talk about his experience leading the TSA and managing 450 airports, 60,000 employees across TSA, and how you do that when people aren't sitting at desks and aren't in a place where you can communicate easily and they have a very challenging job. Leveraging digital solutions with Carolyn, and Terry is going to speak about this in terms of the transition from field offices to online services. How do you get your customer base to make that transition? And she'll get into that case study. And then managing customer service across partners and geographies. And Eric Selzno from the Department of Labor is here, manages 2,500 job centers, lots of different challenges with job seekers and job employers in terms of how to make that match work. So if you turn the page, just a little bit of context. This isn't the first time, obviously, we're trying to address a major challenge like this. Previous administrations have done this. We're building on work from those administrations in the past. And in this administration, in the first term, in April of 2011, we actually issued an executive order to develop that I think developed a good foundation for this around customer service plans, identifying individuals within each agency who are responsible for customer service, and signature initiatives that really reflect the power of this. So, for example, I was at HUD, as Beth mentioned earlier. We developed a website called HUD Ideas in Action, where customers could weigh in on specific issues or questions that we would pose, and we could collect input in a pretty straightforward way. So this initiative helped us identify some of those best practices across different agencies that we're building on now as we move forward on this goal. And the last piece here is I think technology is fundamental to this. I think we'll get into our Smarter IT goal, which supports this goal and really works in collaboration. But how do you leverage some of the benefits of technology to better serve customers? So Carolyn will talk a little bit about then the goal.
Thank you, Beth. I'm sorry, Lisa. I think that we're really excited about the opportunity to work across agencies. I think that all of us within the agencies have had some individual successes, and I know that all of our customers are different, but I think that we can look at best practices and look at some of the kinds of things that we may not have transitioned into our own organization. the biggest challenge I think that all of the agencies will be experiencing is the volume of transactions that they have and the different types of customers that they have to deal with. For instance, in the Social Security Administration, we have 62 million beneficiaries and another 157 million individuals that we keep earnings records on. And so you have a lot of different generations, and how do you deal with the needs of the existing customers at the same time that you're planning for your future customers? We're moving to different service delivery modes. How do you get some individuals to accept the fact that we do in fact have to change? So if you look at page 38, we talk about streamlining our transactions. The idea of how do we make it as simple as possible for the customer? How can we have an operation that will allow them to touch us once they come in the door and you're able to finish the transaction from beginning to end? How do you improve the quality of the people who are serving? Catherine talked about development. Well, the majority of the workforce in some of our organizations are seniors. They've been there for 20, 25, 30 years, so you've got to still look at how you develop them and move them forward as you're looking at customer services, and then looking at the disconnect between the youngsters who are coming in. So the first major challenge is going to be how do we move to online, because many of our own staff are not comfortable with the online services. And then we also have to look at how do we scale up our online presence to accommodate the customers who want to do business. We have probably about 1,200 offices in our operation around the country, and how do you ensure that you're going to have consistency there? How do we have standards that we can then measure across government so that we're all looking at the same metrics and being able to compare ourselves? The most important thing I've found is that we all serve the same customers in many instances, and so we want to have some uniformity and consistency across government. I'd like to limit my comments because I really think that you're going to have a lot of good questions that will come out of the studies that you're going to hear about. But if you look at the sheet there, I think the approaches that we are really focusing on is, one, listening to our customers more consistently, looking at what type of feedback we get, and then ensuring that there are some lessons learned, or whenever we have a customer who was unhappy, to really dissect that and determine why. Collaborating across agencies to share best practices and lessons learned, providing a one-stop government experience, taking advantage of the data sharing that we're doing across government, and then, of course, seizing the flexibility and opportunity that technology offers. And as someone here said, communicating, let our customers know when we're going to be making a change, letting our staff know why we're making a change. And we probably have one thing that those of you from the private sector don't have to deal with, and that is, how do we also get Congress to accept the changes that we believe we need to make because of the shifting environment? At this time, I think you want to introduce your panel.
Sure. I would just note that there are three kind of different audiences here in terms of input. One are these case studies, and if there's specific input that folks have and ideas, we obviously want to focus on that. The second is all the agencies here, and I think, you know, more broadly we can apply some of these lessons to agencies. And then for the two of us, thinking about this from a central government perspective and the broader customer service goal, and I think Enrique mentioned the points of leverage before, that from a central perspective, what we can do to support customer service across the government. So,
and I think that even though you're going to see three different agencies presenting, you're going to see that we all have common issues, and that's the advantage of coming together.
So with that, we'll pass it to Terry Gruber, the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Operations from Social Security Administration.
Right. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Carolyn. I'll apologize in advance. My voice kind of took a weird turn over the evening, so if you can hear me, all right, great. Well, first of all, thank you, and good morning to everybody. I'm extraordinarily excited to have the opportunity to talk with all of you and gain insight from both the PMAB and the PMC. We really want to talk a little bit about the journey that we're trying to take at Social Security, moving from what has largely been a community-based field office service delivery model to one that retains that, but also provides additional ways of doing business. What the slide deck that you have in front of you, I won't, go at length in any one particular slide, but it's really a more pictorial journey of sorts. So if you look at slide 2, and the slides that I'm going to talk about are 40 through 47. So if you look at slide 41, it really is meant just to kind of give you a visual depiction of the scope of work that we do at SSA. We pay about $850 billion in benefits annually to about 65 million people each month. And we do it at a pretty good, or at least what we consider a pretty good administrative rate, at about 1.4% of our benefit costs is what we use to administer the program. Last year, just to get in terms of scope, we get about 45 million people coming through our doors to our 1,200 field offices. We take about 70 million calls through our 1-800 number toll-free center. But then if you kind of look at the bottom left part of the chart, what we talk about is this year, some of the advances we've made in terms of the numbers of claims that we get through an online service channel. About 50% of all of our claims now come in online. That includes our retirement and disability. And 70% of our Medicare claims. And a lot of people continue to work but file for Medicare, and they have really, at high rates, adopted our online service delivery option. Yes.
So you have stat that says 43 million office visits.
Uh-huh.
So what are the top 2 or 3 things that those people come into an office?
I'll give you the top 3 things. Claims, benefit verifications, and Social Security card business. To kind of give you an idea, you know, people interact with Social Security virtually through multiple stages in their life, from birth, when we give you your Social Security number, to death, you know, when you pass away, and then, you know, when you retire or if you become disabled. A lot of people come for replacement cards, that sort of thing. So I would say replacement cards, claims, and benefit verifications are high volume.
And one of those I want to take out of the field office and put online, for instance, the verification of their benefit. There's no reason that they should come into the office, and we know that has to be messaged. So one of the questions that I want to get reaction from those of you from the private sector would be is, how do you get the population you serve to accept a new service delivery channel? What type of messaging do you do around that? And then we have, of course, the challenge of working with the advocates who usually resist change.
Hey, Beth, it's Liz. May I just ask if there's any way to move the microphone closer to the speakers? It's not. It's not.
Okay.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
There's a spider right here.
Oh, perfect, excellent. Thank you, Liz.
It's Mike.
Thank you.
Great. Liz, is that better? Can you hear me better?
Much better.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so, you know, and one of the things I think that we really see a unique opportunity right now is the convergence of several really dynamic factors. Our workloads are increasing, our staff is going down, but technology, and most importantly, the changing expectation of the customer and how they want to do business with us, I would have to say is one of the key motivators. So that's why we think this is such an important opportunity to look at the 70-year paradigm that we have had for delivering service, and how do we evolve that? The other thing is, one of our goals is not only to expand the services that we offer online, but to change the way we engage the customer, to do it in a more robust and dynamic way. Not only do we want to look at changing how we engage the customer, but when we engage the customer. One of our goals is to introduce Social Security early in life to individuals. And so our primary strategy for that is through our use of our personalized portal called My Social Security. At the close of last year, we had about 6 million people registered for that. This year, just last month, we surpassed the 11 million mark. We think that that is an opportunity to really, again, introduce people early in life so that that becomes the way for many to do business with us, never having to visit one of our brick and mortar facilities, should they choose not to. The next slide, which is slide 42, is kind of a cute little depiction of how we want to transform our service delivery. Again, full service is the way that our brick and mortar facilities provide service to individuals. If you look in the middle column, which calls transitional service, what we see again is an opportunity to transition from a full service model for those who don't need that, but to one that could be in some instances an assisted service model. Through like a customer service station, which is depicted here. As Carolyn had talked about, one of our objectives is looking at strategic partnerships with third parties and advocates where we have mutual customers, where we can take advantage of data sharing across government so that, again, customers aren't hopping on a bus to come to our office, to go to another state office in order to get their service done. And then finally, the last, picture there is really the self-service model, which we're kind of looking at. The next slide is really just an illustrative example of customer engagement from our standpoint. We administer both Social Security, one of the nation's largest entitlement programs, but also a program called Supplemental Security Income, which is a program for blind, disabled, and aged individuals with limited income and resources. Part of that program requires regular reporting of their own income, wages, and work. We used to do that through a telephone model, which admittedly was a little bit cumbersome. We had, some degrees of the reports were wrong. It was kind of hard to get through the voice recognition. So what we looked at and heard is, customers want to do business with us through mobile devices. And so we tried this first transactional mobile application and have really been able to increase the numbers of successful wage reports through a little bit more user-friendly type of thing. But we want to do more of that. The next slide.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So as you go this year to 80,000 is what the slide says?
Uh-huh.
What is the total possible? So what's the?
That's a very good question. It's hard because it's a really good question. It's hard for me to specifically answer because not every SSI recipient works. We certainly do have, I think we had last estimated somewhere between about 600 to 700,000 in terms of population of SSI beneficiaries that have some level of work. Whether that whole universe would be subject to this is part of the challenge I think that we have is, so our rules are really complex, and because of the complexity, not everybody can avail themselves of the mobile application. So I do think that that is one of the challenges. How do we get to market sooner products that any of our beneficiaries or recipients can use?
The other piece is, because you've asked a couple questions about metrics, which I love. I'm a data geek. Turn my mic on. So anyway, I love the questions. You asked a couple questions about metrics, and I think, to me, it's really helpful because it says, okay, once we know who's available, it's the same thing as the sourcing penetration question, right? If we know the available universe, that's how we can measure the progress we're making versus, if some of it's just either not accessible statutorily, regularly, you then can figure out where you're putting your effort and how much progress you're making. And so it just becomes a critical element of what's my baseline, and so what's my penetration of the achievable baseline, not of the potential, some of which is not achievable. So really helpful, I think, for all of us as we think about what we're doing here. It's the relevant size of what we're doing within the big universe of things we're touching.
Great, thank you. And the next two slides really just kind of give you, again, a visual depiction of some trend lines in terms of where we're seeing our online claims going, where we're seeing interest in our flagship application, My Social Security. And then the slide that's entitled Customer Engagement is really about, and we would really like your perspective and insight on how best to support a customer who is not in that traditional face-to-face model, but perhaps in a video interaction with us, or perhaps online, but they're stuck and they need just a little bit of help. And if we gave it to them, would they stay there, kind of thing. the slide that's titled Welcome Go Online is about really how we leverage our workforce. We've got about 35,000 people in our field offices and on our teleservice or our 1-800 number telephone network. They really are the key ambassadors for us in terms of engaging the public and introducing them to the online channel. So they're really part of our strength is to engage them in helping people understand all the options that they have. But when you pivot to the last slide, which is the challenge slide, equally, maintaining an agile, adaptable, as Director Archuleta said, a tech agile workforce, and retaining them, knowing that that our employees will have very different expectations is a challenge for us. One area that continues to be a challenge is how you manage in uncertain resource times. We actually have done well, thanks to OMB and Congress this year in terms of some of the budget we got or we received, but it's not necessarily one that's going to be sustained over time. Improving time to market. So, one of the challenges I would say that we have had is when we come up with an innovative service, a high demand service that we think a young person would want to, interact with SSA online, it takes us a while to get it up and running. Some of those are IT challenges, but a lot of it is around business process, some of the regulatory structures that we have that govern how we conduct our business. Carolyn had referenced earlier, another challenge is ensuring access for vulnerable populations. The online channel, for many, can be a channel of choice. For some, it's not something they can avail them to. So how do we continue to provide the service across the spectrum without shutting folks out? Combating fraud and protecting privacy. I think you gentlemen and folks probably know better than anybody that challenge. Any new online product we've put on, fraudsters target it and take a look. And then, like I said, legislative and regulatory limitations. I'll give you two examples. We have regulatory limitations on when we can use video for certain types of interactions with the public that say, well, you have to do this face-to-face. But in some instances, face-to-face is so narrowly defined that it doesn't encompass video. Yet in others, it does. Some of our regulations require still wet signatures on some documents. Again, we have been able to overcome that largely in how we do our online retirement claims, but not everywhere. So those are just some of the challenges that
Terry, I think one other challenge you probably should have listed here is the fact that a significant amount of our workload is handled at the state level by state employees, and therefore
Very
their
good.
systems are very different than the federal. And how do you ensure consistency and policy compliance and that kind of thing?
That's exactly right. Our disability program is really a partnership between federal government and state, and not necessarily the interoperability we would look for.
There's a whole suite of agencies who have that. I see heads nodding across the room here. We're going to talk about that a little more in labor, but it's the ability to control that is a challenge. Let's describe it that way.
So really, that is it, and would appreciate any questions, comments, or insights.
So I have a comment. First, I'm going to state the very obvious, and then I'm going to get a little hyperbolic on you. So in about 20 years from now, no one is going to want to walk into any of your offices, and no one is going to want to call any of your 800 numbers. So I know that is the obvious. I mean, you probably all have kids. They don't like communicating that way. And so knowing that's your end state, and that is very much the end state, then here's where I'm going to get hyperbolic. I think you've got to start viewing any face-to-face interactions that any of you have, or any call center interactions that you have, as a failure. Your whole philosophy has to be humanless interactions. And if people insist on walking into the office, or if they insist on using the phone, every one of your agents needs to train that person each time on the luxury of what it's like using .com or a mobile device.
That's an
And it-
interesting observation, but our customers are not our problem. I have, some of the things that you've just mentioned that I implemented, there was restrictions in my budget, language that Congress put in that basically say you can't do those things. And now I'm getting ready to have hearings about additional things that I'm doing. I'm still doing them as long as the law allows me, but I also need some congressional support for my budget.
So let me push back a little bit, because budget is, a problem that everybody has. And I do know that there's going to be legislation within now and the next 20 years that's going to loosen this up, or else, there's going to be a mutiny in your customer base.
Right.
But I truly believe that a lot of people are using the phone and using your agents because your websites and your mobile devices aren't user-friendly enough. So if you look at the 3 reasons why people, I'll go to the Social Security example. If you look at the 3 reasons why people are walking into that office, my guess is that all 3 of them could be handled through a mobile app or through an online interaction. And if it's not the top 3, then maybe the 4th or the 5th. So, and this is not only going to train your clients, but it's also going to train your workforce. So I'll give you an example of when I lived through this. So when I was at Fidelity Investments, I had people that kept calling the phone to get stock quotes. And it was the darndest thing. I mean, it just, they could have gotten it faster if they got on our website. They could have gotten it faster if they got on our mobile apps. But they just kept calling and calling and calling. So we started taking these customers and putting them in a separate gate. And this part's counterintuitive, but we literally took our very best agents and had them patiently describe how they could get that information over and over again, and they wouldn't give them the quote until, and some of these folks say they were on the 10th, 12th time, and it got so laborious for them that they stopped calling. And you know what? They kind of loved it after they weaned themselves off. So my suggestion is, again, I said it was hyperbolic, Carolyn, so I know you can't do this for every transaction, but I know there are a ton of them that could be humanless, and as counterintuitive as it is, people prefer humanless, even people my age. I really don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to buy it online. I want to get customer service online. I talk all day. I just want to go home and interact with my computer or my smartphone.
I had a just similar. Yeah, no, I had a similar thought as I was hearing, and I know from past work how very complicated it is to implement common sense change because of the rules and regulations you guys are under. So I kind of put that caveat right up front. But one of the things that struck me as you were talking, and in my dealings, is it's all about customer service and what you're facing. It's about speed, pace, and urgency. And I do agree with Gail that you need to flip the equation internally as this is something we need to get to. Whereas if you were in the private sector and you had competition, you wouldn't have any choice. And so if there could just, customer service is about assuming that you don't have a choice but to get to that end solution. So, my question is, when you talk about the speed to market of some of these technologies and how it takes it forever, since you can't manufacture internal competition that, kind of get that sense of urgency, is this stuff that could be outsourced by private sector so that you'd at least get the speed to market solved versus kind of the internal bureaucratic stuff?
The question.
And then the second thing I wanted to get in, and I apologize, is that I played around on your website, and I think you need to be best in class on that, and, you're not, and you recognize that. I think it's certainly good, but with all of these questions, the one thing I found that was missing that people learn and how they learn much more so, and we found this with a million Avon representatives, which is the wisdom of the mob and having a community that self-corrects and answers each other, is much more a way that this new generation and increasingly people learn than call into the agency, answer back, visit the website, answer back. And so I wonder if you had considered sponsoring a community that can kind of self-correct and answer a lot of these questions. We found that it took about 80% of our workload away.
Thank you.
One of the telecom clients I worked with, actually, when we did a little test, right, the sort of answer you could
wisdom of
find
the
on the
mob.
website was better than actually their Q&A desk.
Big time. I mean, we had this situation where we had 6 million Avon representatives worldwide who were calling into the center or walking into the center, and the reality is that nobody answers your question better than somebody that is exactly like you, sitting anywhere in the world, who went through the same thing and can talk to you in your language and the nuances of how they solved it. That I can't tell you how much people prefer learning from the wisdom of the mob in terms of your customers rather than, as Gail said, interacting and calling you guys. And so I would strongly encourage you to seek out ways to set up a Social Security user community where they can help each other solve their problems, because I think you'll see your incoming calls reduced dramatically.
Very helpful. I'm going to just, Sarah, Chris, Carolyn.
So very quickly, and I'm now speaking from the perspective of the IRS and thinking the extent to which we can take some of this very good sort of modeling that is going on with Social Security sort of to heart at the IRS. And I want to say there is one thing, though, that we do really have to tackle, and that is the use of online communication for Social Security numbers. I think that is something that is different about what we're doing versus maybe the Avon representative. We have to figure out better how we can get people comfortable sharing their Social Security numbers online. And if you look
Although I would push back and say no one likes to put their credit card data online either.
That's right, and, but again, we certainly don't want to open ourselves up to, to data breaches, to instances of that. So I think we have to, we want to think that through very carefully, because while there are huge benefits and possibilities here in terms of the online relationship, in terms of getting refunds, knowing the status of where your tax return stands, and these are all just things that we want to aim for. We also have to figure out how to get people comfortable turning over their Social Security numbers.
Yeah. Chris.
I think one thing that we could use some help from the corporate folks here is just help on websites and what the public-facing aspect of our agencies is. Until very recently, I think it's fair to say Department of Labor had one of the clunkier websites in the federal government, and we were trying to be all things to all people. We were trying to put out news releases, we were trying to put out statistical releases, we were trying to help people find jobs, we were trying to help you report an OSHA violation. So everything was on the homepage, and it was so clunky that when I ask people, how do you find anything on our website, they say they Google our website, and then that's how. And so I think this is part of the problem, and I think at most federal agencies, our website is controlled by our public affairs people, because that's the outward facing, here's what the secretary is doing, here's the message we're putting forth. The customer service people they play a role, but they don't play the prominent role. And I think how you figure out when you've got a big government agency that is a holding company for a lot of different interests, and you're trying to serve different constituencies, how do you make it customer friendly? Because I agree with Gail, I don't really want to talk to anybody. If I can solve my problem online, I want to solve it online. If I go through the Department of Labor website right now, I can't do that.
I'm going to play Time Cup again. We could just keep going. I want to come back, and we're keeping track of a couple of these things, because I think there'll be some specific follow-ups we can do. This, how do you use a user community to provide assistance? And as I heard you guys say, both to the workforce, right, how they can help them get their own jobs done, help migrate people, as well as to users. I think those are two distinct questions. But in the spirit of giving everybody their fair shot, Lisa, who's on deck next?
Joe Salvatore from TSA, who manages these 450 airports, and we'll talk about the challenges of a dispersed workforce.
Yep.
And Joe, we're going to actually just ask you to flip chairs just because you're a little closer to the phone here, so give us a second while Joe walks his way around the room.
Thank you, guys. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
No, we're so happy that you're able to join us this way, and it's actually not much inconvenience. It's about a 20-foot walk, so it's okay.
And my voice is my voice. So, good afternoon. I'm honored to be here, glad to be here, anxiously waiting to get some feedback. 'Cause
I love pre. Can we start there?
Yeah, we're going to certainly get to pre.
We love pre. We love
Pre-check.
TSA pre.
Yeah,
And
we're
vote
gonna
if you
certainly
love
talk about it.
TSA pre.
So,
Sorry, just one.
no, I love it too. And I'm glad to hear that you do. So I am TSA, and I'm responsible for TSA operations, as Lisa said. We're about 450 airports, roughly about 60,000 employees. Great to hear the comments about most of our employees are in the field. They're not in DC, so that's a little bit of a challenge. I'm the guy in charge of the operations, so a lot of times I'm the butt of the late night jokes. I get the criticism. I look at Twitter every day. I get the Facebook feeds or all those feeds. We pay attention to it, and we're not ignoring it. We do have a tough problem in TSA, so that's why I'm glad to be here. I wanted to talk a little about some of the customer service initiatives we have undertaken in TSA, and then I wanted to highlight some of the challenges that remain in TSA and solicit your feedback, because we certainly have challenges. Just a little bit of scope on TSA. We physically screen about 1.8 million people a day, and most of them are Americans. So when you talk about being a face and humanless interaction, we're actually touching 1.8 million people, majority of Americans, going through their bag, going through their carry-on, going through their check bag a day, right? And those bags, about 1.2 million check bags, 3 million carry-on bags a day. So we are a face organization, not necessarily a website, not necessarily a phone number. We're somewhat the face of the federal government, I feel, often, and we have challenges with that. So on the next slide that I did want to talk about was pre-check. So TSA, for those that don't know, TSA stood up immediately after 9/11 to prevent another 9/11 from happening. We stood up very quickly. We had a zero defect mentality. We were not about to let another 9/11 happen. And basically, I'll be candid, we treated everybody like a terrorist. We have since moved back from that approach and are taking much more of a risk-based, intelligence-driven approach. And that's why you're seeing some of the programs like PreCheck and others. And we're really, in the past 12 to 24 months, are really changing the way we do screening at airports. And if you don't know, whether you like TSA or not, we are pretty much the gold standard worldwide. Many countries emulate to our system. And as we change here in America, I think you're going to see the world change on how they screen traveling passengers. And what we're doing is, we've been in the business now long enough, 12 years, to realize not everybody is a terrorist. And we need to make some risk-based decisions. And we are. We're screening youth differently, if they're 12 and under. We're screening 75 and older differently than we used to. We're screening active duty military and other trusted populations such as PreCheck. And we're screening them differently. And it's going pretty well. I get a lot of positive comments like I got from you. Because some of the benefits in being in the PreCheck or in one of these populations is you can keep your jacket on. You may not have to take your shoes off. You can keep your liquids in your bag.
Thank you.
You can keep your
Exactly.
laptops in your bag. And I'll be honest with you, our goal is every person goes through screening in that manner. We do need some technology to help us along the way. I'll also say what's challenging is I receive an intelligence brief every day, and I'm amazed on almost every terrorist organization that would like to do something to the West and America, for some reason, is focused on aviation. So a lot of times, the public may not understand the threat that we're faced with, but we're faced with a threat in aviation. And it's of grave concern, and it's a difficult threat. And the terrorist organizations that cause and do us harm, they're pretty smart. They understand our technology. They understand our processes. And 9 times out of 10, when FBI or others infiltrate a plot, the plot is concerning to us because it goes right at vulnerabilities. So we have in TSA the challenge of security, not letting another 9/11 happen, and customer service. And because we stood up so quickly in a 9/11 environment, customer service took a hit and security was paramount. We're now trying to find that balance as we move along. As well, cannot have another 9/11. So those are some of the background on TSA. What we've done customer service-wise, I will say we have an app, and it was voted by somebody as a very good app. We do have a contact center. We do have a phone number, but I do take your point on humanless. We do have a website. But we also have what we call TSA Cares. And this is for people who are disabled or have mental disabilities to call to the airport ahead of time. And we will assign a person to them to bring them through the checkpoint. And it is working well. And we do it with people with disabilities, and we do it with wounded warriors. And I have somewhere the number of calls, but we're getting a lot of calls, a lot of positive feedback. And each time we have one perception change at a time is progress for us. We coordinate them through security. Any medical condition, disability, or as I said, special need. Our contact center, we get 1 million calls, but I think we've put our contact center is very self-service, so we have 11 different languages. So almost 48% of the inquiries get handled without talking to a person through one of our 11 different language self-service centers. Now, my challenge is, I do want to spend more time on this. I think the biggest one we have in TSA and will remain is security service. Very, very, I can make any airport look like Fort Knox, and I'll ensure nothing will happen. But I can't affect commerce, the movement of people and goods. So it's that balance that we have to strike. Very challenging. The other thing are some of the things I've heard today about the workforce. My workforce is not in DC. In fact, they don't sit in front of a computer. They're probably more like Avon. The requirement to be a screener at an airport is a GED. So I have roughly 48,000 people, GED or higher, no computers, no Blackberries. They clock in, they go to the checkpoint, they run like mad, especially in peak travel times. Very difficult to communicate with that workforce. Very difficult to get standard applications. Different cultures in different parts of the US. For example, I use this a lot. A gun comes into an airport in Dallas, that's one thing, versus a gun going into the airport at JFK. Two different cultures on how we respond and the level of excitement that those get. In Dallas, in Texas, no big problem. Go back to your car and lock it up. And when you come back, we'll make sure you get through. In New York, I get a different response. So the problem that I have is inconsistencies. And that's, I would venture to say, the American people, their biggest heartburn with TSA is inconsistencies. So the hard part there, too, is one of the best security apparatus in my environment is random and unpredictable. And that is one of the worst customer service
You can't
attributes.
change that, though. I read that in your brief. You unfortunately, because you said, I ran the largest security company in the world. So at the end of the day, when you deal with a malicious attacker, you have to, unfortunately, there's going to be some inconveniences. And so this random search that you do, you're going to have to keep doing it.
Right.
There's no way around that.
And we
I
have.
mean, I'd love to tell you there is, but having studied this problem, there's not a way around it.
But it frustrates the American people
It does.
because they want consistency.
Yeah, but there's certain things that they have to get over. Security is important. And so at some point, they just got to get over it. I'm
Exactly.
sorry to say that. That sounds very non-customer centric, but.
No, but it's true. I mean,
It's
we've
true.
all been in situations where someone's complaining,
Yeah.
in line, and your reaction is, well, in the TSA line, give me a break. You want to repeat? I mean,
I'm
in
just saying,
some respects, you're not going to be able to please everyone.
Yeah, and I think all frequent flyers understand the randomness and the random checks, and sometimes you'll go through pre-check and they'll check your hands and check other things. On the other hand, I think and this kind of gets to some of the, and I think it's innovation, that, you know, you're trying new things, and that's good. But in pre-check, this, what I think you refer to as managed inclusion, where you'll take some people out of the main lines, throw them into the pre-check line. They've never been to an airport before, and you're standing behind 20 people.
Right.
You know, and you had one expectation. You knew there was going to be random checks, but you didn't know there were going to be 20 people in front of you in line that had never been to the airport before.
That don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, that don't know what they're
Slow
doing.
up
So
the
I think
process.
I think managed inclusion is something where there's a level of predictability that's expected, particularly from people in pre-check that are very experienced in most cases with flying and going through security. And then as you begin to charge for pre-check, I think
Right.
that's another aspect of what you're going to need to be concerned about going forward, is making sure that there is at least some level of predictability. Some of the predictability for me is I know there's going to be a random check every now and again when I go through. I get that.
Right.
Yeah.
Joe, I just wanted to make a comment and a question. First of all, I think you guys provide extraordinary customer service, and I am,
Thank you.
and I, like everybody here, I fly all over the country, and I've been amazed at the people and how polite and considerate and thoughtful. And
I agree.
And I just think it's really extraordinary. And on this best practices thing we were talking about earlier, Beth, you know, I don't know if you could take a few sentences, but I have to believe that whatever you did, because 4 or 5 years ago that wasn't true.
That's right.
And whatever you did to get your workforce to have those qualities, you know, as in Liz's business and in my old days at McDonald's, you know, it was very challenging to get people to have both the skills they need to do the job right and be as good at customer service as these people are. And I'm wondering if there's some things you did that aren't worth other people in the government hearing about.
Yeah, we focused a lot on conduct. I mean, we did soft skills, and then we focused on conduct. And, you know, we have some conduct issues with a workforce that size. And one of the things that, when I was talking about the issues, they said, well, there's a management directive that's 35 pages that talks about their conduct. I said, do you think, remember, my employees don't have access to a computer. So when we put out an HR policy that's 35 pages, yeah, we have that policy. Nobody really knows what it is. So conduct, and I boiled conduct into like 10 things, like don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, treat others respectfully, and it's very simple, 10 things, and put it on a card, and made the supervisors accountable to give the conduct training to the employees. And it started with me giving it to my direct reports and all the way down to the officers. So I think focusing on the conduct is helping. And then we did do focused efforts on soft skills and customer service skills.
Do you have a lot of attrition?
It's about 8%.
That's really good.
It's 8% for full-time, and we're about a 20% part-time force, and our part-time attrition is a little bit higher, I think around 12%, maybe higher.
One of the things that's important, one of the things that's important, and I think you touched on it, was, you know, we are going to do these random checks, but it's when you don't have the same service available at each airport, I think that creates inconsistency, which makes people frustrated. So consistency is really important. I think you touched on it, and the question is, what are the barriers to consistency as far as same services being available at different airports?
So a couple of barriers on that is it's not efficient at some of the airports. Some of the airports who don't do large volume or don't have the air carriers who are working with us on the pre-check, for example, it's not efficient for us to staff a pre-check lane when you don't have enough people going through the pre-check. That was, to some extent, some of the reason managed inclusion.
The point is consistency. I don't want to focus on the specific of why you can't do it in an airport, but consistency in how people interact or what they do
Yeah.
is what's important.
So I think this is probably where one of the areas I need the biggest help on is it's communication. And it's how do I get that consistency to 60,000, 450 airports to say, do it this way, not this way. We've chosen a climate of what we call SOPs, standard operating procedures, and I honestly hate them. And I think it's driving our inconsistency. I have 26 different ones, 1,500 pages that go through my attorneys before they get to my workforce. And I don't understand what we end up telling them in our SOP. So if there's a better way to tell an employee, go through a bag and look for a bomb this way versus this way, and not have it in written SOP, I'm all ears. We've experimented with video, but we're struggling. And I think that's driving our inconsistency.
Can you explain that? I saw that in the pre-read. Can you just explain what the challenges you have with video, just so I understand?
Well, where a lot of our folks work in the airports, there's not Wi-Fi, there's not plugs, there's not, some of them are in the bag rooms where I don't have heat and AC. So the infrastructure, I have infrastructure problems to deliver a video presentation to where most of my workforce is.
Same from a training perspective.
From a training perspective. And
Okay,
that's
and so,
driving inconsistency.
You don't send home DVDs or anything like that, or deliver content on the web?
We do, but they would have to do it on their personal computer or on their personal time for the most part.
Can we talk about one of your challenges? You talked about managing social media. I mean, there's a lot of best practices now that are emerging on, one, how to use specific technologies to kind of consolidate that feedback from social media, and there's lots of technologies out there we can discuss. The second thing is making it really visible to everybody in your organization. So what I've seen some folks do is take that content that's coming in, aggregate it, and as it's happening, make sure that the leadership teams are seeing what is the feedback that's coming in on social media, so that it's very, very visible. And so first, the technology to aggregate it, second, the technology to make it visible, and then third, the technology or process to respond.
Right. So I can tell you, I had 78% positive tweets in the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I failed to mention, but I have my public affairs, who has a challenging and opportunistic job. David Castlevetter is here, and he helps with that. But the one thing on that is, as I said, we screen 1.8 million. If one event goes awry and ends up on YouTube, Twitter, it damages our day. Now, 1.7999 million may have gone very well, but one, patting down a 2-year-old or somebody with disabilities.
But so that's this kind of thing that you have to then aggregate and see if there's a consistent theme that is causing the negative feedback. And if you can deal with it because you're not creating a new security issue, then that's one thing. If you can't deal with it because of the different issues you're dealing with, so what you want to find is the patterns in that, because you are going to have, we had a business that had 200 million consumers, and some people had trouble installing our software. And what we tried to do is find the root cause of when there was a pattern of why it happened. And so the question is, when there's a pattern of negative feedback, what can you do to address it? That's what are the patterns in those tweets, I guess, is what I'm looking for, that are negative.
Yeah, Joe, you're always going to have a rogue, weird incident. You are.
Always.
You can't control a workforce that big. I think it is fabulous that you agonize over each one of those, and you're in a job similar to mine, which is the press isn't going to find it interesting that it was a perfect day and nothing happened. The press wants to find the thing you're doing wrong because that's what makes an interesting story. So a lot of it is playing whack-a-mole every single time someone
Very good
pats
analogy.
down a 2-year-old. You just have to keep reminding people we don't pat down 2-year-olds. But at the end of the day, you heard from a bunch of frequent travelers here that the service is pretty outrageous. And I think if you, in a positive way. And I really believe that if you ask the random traveler, do you actually mind that they're doing all this? They're going to say no, because we know that even though we don't read about it, they're keeping us safe. And it's those little sound bites that if you just tell your agents, say good morning when somebody comes through and they're doing it, that's going to go a much longer way than, the wacky, rogue incident. So, as Enrique said, there's lots of tools to look at this. It sounds like you're looking at them. But, human nature is we always look for the one bad one in the sea of great response. And I would just remind you to.
And some of it's marketing, which
Yes.
we're not that good at inherently.
Yeah.
The government's not.
That's what, if I can make a suggestion, because I work in the restaurant industry where frankly, every other day there's a report on something that someone's doing in a restaurant, whether they're writing something inappropriate on a check or whether somebody is spitting in food. I mean, we're the darlings of YouTube. And the reality is exactly what you said, which is 99.9% of the people do a great job. And you are never going to be able, even with data analytics, to pinpoint and stop, as Gail said, rogue behavior. It's all about your communication strategy and your marketing strategy. So the resources spent, you got to train people, you got to equip people, but there's not a chance you're going to be able to stop with your workforce because we have 100,000 employees. I can't make sure everybody at every point in the day is doing what they're supposed to be doing. You just need to set a culture of good intent and training, and then you need to focus on communications and marketing. And I find the most effective tool is to say, you know what, address it head on, be transparent, and talk about the 99.999 things that do go well. But that's where we focused our attention versus thinking that we can root out the person that wants to put their experience on YouTube with a server that was maybe inappropriate or serve someone underage, whatever. You just can't, with that type of distribution, you can't control it. So you need to focusing on training and communications and marketing.
The one thing I would add, and I think all of us have commented on this positive trend line in our anecdotal experiences over the last 5 years. The one thing, though, that I would add, I think there are opportunities. As the old adage is, if you've been to one airport, you've been to one airport. So they're all different.
True.
It's a different experience, different infrastructure layout, people that are managing, and all those types of things. But I do think that there are some airports where I'll go through the process and I'll say, wow, those people are different. They are fantastic. And so there is variation of good and great and excellent as you go through the various airports. And I do think publishing performance data and even feedback on the various airports. And again, they're not like-for-like airports, but I have a sense for the volume at this airport is the same as the volume at this airport, and yet the experience is different. And I think if there's some benchmarking, if there's transparency around the data that you make available to the traveling public, it can be both a marketing tool and also a benchmarking tool, and you can go to, XYZ airport and say, what's different here that we can emulate it at this other like-sized airport?
Yeah, I agree. And we do pay a lot of attention to wait times, which is something that's a big issue for us and a big metric.
Right.
And we do pay attention to it. And we've improved like 98% wait less than 20 minutes in America. 98%.
Sam brought up a question for me, which is, do you think about reward and recognition programs that highlight airports that are doing outstanding jobs against those benchmarks?
Yeah, I mean, we do. We have like Airport of the Year. We have, Team of the Year. We actually, with our workforce, do a fairly pretty good job with pay for performance. We've improved on that and doing a cash payout at the end of the year for those who scored a 4 or higher. We're actually pretty good on the pay for performance thing for the type of workforce we have.
I think the broad question, which we may want to come back to in some follow-up, about not just creating the benchmarks at a granular level, because I think this issue applies to actually many places across the federal government where we have decentralized similar operations, right? Airports are one, but we'll come back to this with there's many things that happen this way. And not just how you measure it, but it'd be great for us to have a longer conversation about how one really operationalizes not just the benchmarking, but the follow-up to the benchmarking. How do you connect the good performers with the weaker performers in the spirit of them learning? How do you create an obligation and a mindset among the folks who are leading that actually it's in there, to get them excited about sharing those practices. Most people in general like to talk about the good jobs they're doing. There's lots, but I think that may be something, and I'm looking across at my colleagues here, where we may want to come back to folks around that, both in terms of decentralized workforce. I think that's actually a big opportunity across the government. This is one place in particular. You have the advantage of actually having good metrics, just relatively good metrics to start with compared to others. But the process here, I think, can be very helpful in comparing things. We're starting to do this. Catherine's not here, but using the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, which you now can get down to, I think it's 13,000 or 18,000 discrete units. That's one place. But this whole process of using that, creating the right peer groups and doing feedback loops, may be something we want to come back to this group on, because I think it goes back to the question at the beginning of how we spread best practices. You actually have a big advantage because you've actually got data. And you are a step ahead of, you've got data that you use and you track, so you are actually steps ahead of other places. But I think there's still more we can all try and learn from that process.
The one comment I would add is an important thing to what you were just saying, Beth, is this notion of a customer loyalty or customer satisfaction champion that is with all the different operating units, so that there's somebody who is kind of trying to learn the best practices from other places, either in the government, other agencies, or other airports, and then is that kind of advocate on site for it. So just think about this concept of a champion for satisfaction or loyalty, and we should talk about how that gets implemented, because I've seen that work incredibly well.
Yeah, the other thing is there's been all kinds of research that definitively proves that employee sat is a leading indicator for customer sat. So your attrition rate being low is an indicator that your employees are happy, and that is why, your service is better. So, there's a lesson to be learned there. You're measuring, you're rewarding, and people are happy, and therefore your customers are happy.
So I'm going to play Time Cup again. I think one of the other things we can probably follow up on as well is this question about distributing content and training to a workforce without a desk in an office, right? Which again, and we may think about some ways to follow up on that. I think, Liz probably has some ideas on that potentially, just given the folks in your restaurants also come in, they work really hard, and then they leave, right? And they don't have desks in
We
offices.
have the exact same issue. I'm happy to go offline with it and share it. We struggle with the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's great. So, thank you. We're going to just do the flip and just move chairs again and go to our last example.
So Eric Selesno is the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Department of Labor and oversees the 2,500 job centers, and will continue the challenging cases.
Good afternoon. I hope to test some of Gail's earlier comments here and get that input. This is a fascinating conversation. I really look forward to being here. Good afternoon. Eric Selesno, Department of Labor. I guess it's good morning, almost afternoon. Had I had the benefit of this conversation earlier, I might have done a different presentation for this.
You can just adapt as you go.
I'm just going to talk you through it, and I hope I do as well as Joe did. That was a fabulous presentation, Joe. It was great, very helpful for me and what we do. I want to introduce a couple of my colleagues. Andy Ridgway and Larry Burns are over there, and they work with this customer service issue every day across the country, so they may jump in to help me if there's a question I can't answer. So we're at the United States Department of Labor. We're a division called the Employment and Training Administration. We oversee unemployment insurance. I think you've heard of that. Our Job Corps program, the nation's apprenticeship system, and our Workforce Investment Act programs. And one of the programs I want to talk to you about today is our Workforce Investment Act program, passed in Congress in 98, implemented in 2000, that provides $3.4 billion a year to states and locals to implement the nation's workforce development system, which includes job training. It is often called a job training system, but only 13 to 15% of our people actually get job training that we pay for, where they go to a community college or something. And we have the good news as part of the President's opportunity agenda, skills and a trained and skilled workforce is a very big part of that, an opportunity to people, education and training, and move up on the economic ladder. Some other just background facts, 70% of the jobs between now and 2020 will require more than a high school diploma. Right, some post-secondary, something. I was surprised that it was a GED minimum requirement. I'm sure much of your folks probably have more than that, but for most jobs, there's something beyond a high school diploma that's needed, whether it's a 3-month training or certification, a pharmacy technician credential, nursing assistant credential, a nursing degree, something for most jobs. And many of those jobs are middle skills jobs. They don't require 4-year degrees or even 2-year degrees, but some sort of credential or certification. So we operate a system called America's Job Centers. They were originally called one-stop employment centers, but they went by different names all over the country. In Pennsylvania, they were Career Link. In Virginia, they were Skills Source Centers. In Maryland, they were one-stop centers. In California, they were named something else. Even within states, some of those centers were like that. They're often described, New York Times described them as the emergency rooms of the recession. And so imagine you've worked in the financial services industry in New Jersey. You've done that your entire career. You're 55 years old, and during the recession, you get laid off. You're highly educated. You're highly skilled. You've been unemployed for 2.5, 3 years. You're eating into your kids' college funds. You're pulling out money from your 401ks, and you can't get a job because people tell you don't have the experience, or they think you're too expensive and they don't want to hire you. Imagine you're a veteran transitioning out of the military. We get 1.5 million people a year come in our centers all across the country who are transitioning veterans looking for employment. Perhaps you're an ex-offender getting out of prisons or jail. You know, there's 700,000 prisoners that get out of prisons every year, but there's 10 million people that go in and out of county jails every year. They're going to come out. They're going to be looking for jobs. You could be a mom that's been working in the mall at a dollar store, not the dollar store, but a dollar store. Maybe you've been a manager, and maybe there's some corporate closings, and they downsized, and now you have a layoff letter in your hand. Or maybe you're at the factory for a mass layoff with a WARN notice and corporate restructuring. Your plant was closed, and after 20 years at a manufacturing plant, you're out of work. During the recession, people voted with their feet. We had a 150% increase in people walking in physically to one-stop centers. We serve both employers and job seekers. So that's sort of a challenge, the dual customer service. Mostly we're a counseling-oriented business. People come through the front door, they see a greeter, they get triaged to a particular service. What's common among them is they all want a job. Their pathway to that job is they may need to get their high school diploma, they may need to get a post-secondary credential, they may need bus passes, they may need childcare, they may need some other activity or service. So we have a network of these 2,532 employment centers across the country. Back in the day, you may have known them as unemployment offices. That changed 15 years ago. And so they're now called these American Job Centers, which, by the way, were rebranded by the president a couple of years ago because they were called different things in different states. So the Department of Labor now refers to them as American Job Centers, and they're proud partners in the American Job Center network. So some of the issues that came up here today were very interesting, right? Employers all over the country tell us, and they tell Secretary Perez, who, by the way, customer service is at his core. Serving people is at his core, and so this is a very important value to him and us. But many employers will tell us, I just can't find the people that we need. We just can't find the shipping clerks we need. We can't find the people on the manufacturing line with the skills and attitudes and basics that they need. We just can't find people that can pass a drug test. But mostly they say we can't find people with the right education, training, or skill sets. At the same time, we have all these different people coming in getting service. At the same time, since the recession, our numbers went up 150%, yet our funding and budget went down considerably over that period. And so that's always been a challenge to it. Our funding on page 55 is very interesting because we fund and oversee this system, but our funds go to a state workforce board. By the way, workforce boards are, every state has them. They're in the law. There are state boards, and then there are local boards. The state board is generally appointed by the governor. It's 51% business. It's chaired by a CEO. And then they have other folks on that board from community colleges and economic development and other state agencies and other partners, but 51% by law have to be private sector businesses. So our funds and our system and our guidance and our instructions and the infrastructure of the system is sort of passed to a state agency, which then oversees local workforce boards. So in every community, they may work for a mayor, maybe the mayor's office, a county executive, it may be county commissioners that oversee it. Sometimes they're delivered by these one-stop employment, American Job Centers are delivered by government entities. Sometimes they're nonprofits, because you can spin them out as nonprofits if a mayor or county executive wants to do that. Detroit's just spun theirs out to be a nonprofit. It was a good move for the city of Detroit at the time. And then many of these are rural workforce boards, and if you look on page 50, slide 58, you'll see our network of boards, of sites across the country. But our local workforce investment boards, that's where 92% of the money that we send out goes. States get to keep about 8% for their activities, but 92% of that, 91.5%, by formula, gets distributed to local workforce boards in your county, your city, or in your region. And then they operate the American Job Centers, and a certain amount of their money is contracted out for specialized services for a particular job training program in the system. So the Department of Labor sort of oversees this infrastructure. Our guidance, our activity is working with states to deliver services, and then we require states to supervise what's happening at the local and the regional level. We do try to communicate, pass on guidance, and ensure that at the point of service, certain policies are upheld for how you deal with veterans or how to deal with long-term unemployed or some of the various programs and services. We give guidance not only for states but also for the local areas.
And is it guidance, or is there compliance required for funding?
Yeah, there's under the law, there's a set of deliverables and a structured set of activities in general, but it was designed and developed to be a decentralized system where the local workforce boards should have a lot of influence, should craft the strategy for that county, should be part of the state. State has to develop a strategy with the governor's office, and then you want your mayor, your county executive to develop their workforce and economic development strategy for their county. And so these boards are very active. They sometimes get caught up in the weeds of the law and performance oversight and a lot of other activities instead of a grander strategic vision of how to make a skilled workforce that aligns with your economic development interests in your counties. But I think the real and we touch 18 million people a year. A lot of that is through our electronic tools and services. We have an array the Department of Labor does, and then every state does. And the private sector is in this space. There's real-time labor market information that uses spidering technology to pull jobs from everywhere. So there's job banks galore. If you're sophisticated on a computer, you can go to one of these sites. You can find where the jobs. You can click on your zip code or a census tract. You can find training for that occupation in your community. You can find how much it costs. You can find how successful that provider is. That's out there. So there's a lot of self-service activities electronic in every state, including the posting of millions of jobs every day that are out there. The issue is people do vote with their feet, right? So they come into these centers across the country. They're usually in business parks, malls, sometimes on community college campuses. Sometimes they're metro or bus accessible. Sometimes they're not. Many rural workforce job centers are a challenge to get to for the people who live there. But generally what you get in most of them is a greeter at the front door, some sort of immediate triage to send you to the right cubicle in the building or to the resource room, as it's called. All of these look generally the same. It's a big resource room, banks of computers, banks of employment information, and people busily electronically looking or getting counseling or career guidance or advice. And there's an array of services, and it has to be very customized for all of them. If you help somebody get a job in that center, they feel pretty good about you. And we get about 60% of the people jobs who walk in. So we can tell you that last year, of the 1.4 million people who completed a program of service in this particular category, we know that 825,000 of them got a job. And we know that their wages annualized were about $28,000, $29,000 a year. And those are people from Butte, Montana, and Kalamazoo, and New York City, and elsewhere. And they're 18 to 65 is who we're measuring in that particular thing. So we have performance measures that measure entered employment rates, that you got a job, how long you've kept your job, it's a job retention rate, and what the wages are, and we tie that into Social Security wage records. That's basically where our measurements are now. Where they were 15 years ago is you had 17 performance measures, including a customer service measure and including a business satisfaction measure. That was onerous. The Department of Labor came up with a different set of performance metrics that made it simpler and easier to report, pulled customer service out of those. So states still collect that information on customer service. It's not reported, and in many ways, the department has, pulled away a little bit from that being important, has just looked at the outcome measures as important, getting a job, getting wages. But the issue is that we have huge numbers of people coming into these centers. There's a perception that sometimes it's great customer service, sometimes it isn't, but we don't have any hard and fast data to say this is great customer service. But if they're getting a job, We generally get a good report. Or an employer says, I hired somebody from that center one time, they didn't work out, I got rid of them, I'm never going to work with them again, which, happens every day when you hire people off the street, right? Or they mentioned to the governor that they had a great experience or that they had a bad experience, or to the mayor or elsewhere. So the challenge is we've got a diverse group of people coming in, probably trending toward maybe a little bit lower skill, a little bit lower wage, but not always. And the folks who work there have to be able to deal with either this financial analyst who got laid off, or a veteran, and we do have specialized services for veterans, or the mom who got laid off from the store, or somebody with a disability, or somebody who just got out of jail. And so there's a large number of people coming in. A large number of people are getting great services and jobs, but they're all sort of individualized and customized. So, we don't own these employment centers, we fund them. Customer service has always been a value in this workforce system, but they're delivered at the point of service by, again, nonprofit, government agency, community-based organization. And they all do value customer service, and their local boards do value customer service, and some of them keep track of that locally, but we don't have a good sense of that nationally. So I'll set the table with those sort of things and let you help us go from there. Just trying to think if there's anything else critically you need to know. We 525,000 veterans we had about 1 million walk-in the last 4 quarters from which we have good data. We had over 1 million walk in and 525,000 of them got jobs. We know this, single, non-duplicated counts. 825,000 from our other program got jobs. We also have a big youth division that does youth workforce development and summer jobs and things like that. So they're asked to do a lot at the local level. And we're just, would love to rethink customer service because they use the ACSI system early on in this process.
ACSI? Sorry.
The American Customer Service Initiative, the University of Michigan, right? For Michigan's index. And so there was cost associated with that, and there was a certain level of work that state governments had to put out on that. And so it provided that information for a few years. But again, we turned away from that a little bit. And some states still use it, but we turned away from that as a system. And we don't require public reporting on that anymore.
And there's a couple of questions that we tried to encapsulate for you on page 62, for those of you who are following along. I think in particular, this question about metrics and this issue of delivery through others, as you were describing, which is there are policies and guidelines from the Department of Labor, but the operations are owned by somebody else, right? And there's, so.
Right, and you don't have an ability to require certain types of data to be collected from the local system?
We do. Some of
Oh,
it
you
is
do?
by statute, and some of it we can change and add. And again, there were 17 performance measures, and then that was changed down to 7 others for adult and youth. So yes, we do. It's going to take take some time to do that, but yes, we do. And so the balance is too, because the complaint, and I used to run one of these local systems, so I know, we don't want to spend all of our time collecting data. We're trying to serve people, right? And so it's that, which is why they went from 17 down to 7.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a bigot in this area, but I would put back some question. Is it Net Promoter, which is just simply, ask the businesses, would you recommend this to another business? Or to the people you're placing, would you recommend this to a friend? Just something, because when you took it off, you were probably sending a more powerful signal than you even realized, because people shrugged their shoulders and said, I guess this isn't that important. And even though I'm sure the job placement is a big component of customer satisfaction is probably a leading indicator of how well they're going to perform in job performance too. So I just as one piece of advice, I would definitely put that back in. And the other thing is, this is like probably crying out for standard IT. I'm thinking of LinkedIn and how so much of this now is done. By the time the company gets it, it's been screened out and filtered so much electronically that there's probably all kinds of software that you could deploy in all of these locations that would make everybody's life easier and also probably get you better matches for what that's worth.
Go ahead, Chris.
First of all, I just want to thank Eric and his team for the great job they're doing. I think the challenge on metrics, which is something we're looking at across the board, is in the depths of the recession, you could be providing great customer service and people aren't getting jobs. Right. Whereas now we could provide crappy customer service and people are getting jobs. And so I wonder, I'm actually thinking about Sarah talking about the IRS. If I call the IRS and I'm happy with the answer I got, is it because they told me I don't owe any taxes? Or is they answered my question quickly? And so this is the hard part, which I think we could use some help. Because there are external factors that affect customer service.
Yeah, I mean, I feel your pain because when I was at Fidelity Investments, they didn't mind holding for 20 minutes when the dot-com bubble hadn't burst yet. It's like, whoa, I'm rich, I'll hang on the phone. But at the end of the day, people are going to feel better about not getting a job if there was a sympathetic, helpful person listening to them. Are they going to be as satisfied as if they got a job and had crappy service? No. But I still think it's kind of a good thing to measure, and there are going to be exogenous things that completely destroy the relativity of the metric. But it's just a constant reminder to the people that are interacting with those that walk into your offices that this matters regardless of.
I agree. And I think Gail brought up the Net Promoter Score. It's probably a metric that many of you have interacted with. There's a book written that was called The Ultimate Question, which really came down to you ask customers one question, would they recommend? And that metric is something that has been used more and more widely. But the great thing about it is you can always argue why it's not a good metric. But the point is it's a very simple thing. Instead of asking 40 questions, it's one. And then you can take actions from not necessarily just the score, but what people say. And so driving towards some common metric like the NPS, I think is huge. And I'd be curious if there is some effort to have some standard metrics that you're using to measure that external interaction.
One of the things we do know about our system is people do what you inspect, not what you expect at the point of delivery. And so if you change the performance measures, we had a credential measurement at one point, measuring the outcome of our investment after getting a industry recognized credential. That came out too, and you could see the data go with that the credential attainment rates went down as well. So they definitely do that. Is the Net Promoter Score, is that a third party or can anybody sort of do that?
You can do it. You can definitely self-administer, but there are third parties that will do it for you. It literally is titled The Ultimate Question.
Yeah, the book explains it well, though.
So I think that this question then becomes also the other piece I think, Chris, when you think about that question is, to me, one of the things, particularly for things that are decentralized environments like this, it comes back to this peer grouping concept of, in places with comparable levels of unemployment, right? How are people doing? And I think it would really be interesting to understand what is the linkage between customer satisfaction and actually placement. If you take the premise that folks were talking about earlier about an engaged workforce generally delivers higher productivity, right? There have been analytic studies of that in the private sector. To the extent that you end up with things that are operating together, then you get sort of leading and lagging indicators. But you then, with a decentralized environment, to me, the question is both the absolute and the how does this compare to places facing a similar problem? And one would hypothesize that better service would lead to better placement, or would be correlated, may not be a cause. It might keep people coming back more often and using the services better. It might make them more willing to go through the work it will take, but you could lots of reasons. But I think that'd be an interesting thing to help you understand. Because in fact, if it didn't lead to better placement, then there's something else in the system that we need to work on.
What is pretty common in our system, and that's why, I was intrigued with Gail's earlier comments, because there are some very good electronic tools out there, job matching, job searching, both public and private. But what a lot of people are suffering when they come in, they've been laid off for a couple of years, they're stressing out because they're having some major transition in their life, their spouse just left them, so they're looking for a job after many years of not being in the labor market, and they're often looking for support direction and encouragement for something they haven't had to do in 10 or 20 years, right? And so there's that, electronically, you can't always get to that sort of, human touch issue. So, so I think that's one of the challenges.
And in fact, the sympathetic, encouraging voice is actually a value delivery in and of itself, right? Yes, you want to get them a job, but you also want them to feel respected, those things it is a value as well. Mike, were you going to add something?
Well, I was going to take the opportunity to talk about a little bit different
Go ahead.
aspect to which I think people interact with government. We've heard 3 examples here of the financial piece where you affect an individual's bottom line and their sensitivity to, wanting to deal with an easy way to ensure they're going to get the benefits that they want, the security aspect, and then the kind of linking up, matching up, and providing opportunities. And we at the Department of the Interior have all those 3. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we provide direct financial benefits, security, youth particularly, we're trying to match up and really get opportunities. And then we've got a 4th element, which is recreation. And so I'm trying to there's obviously a correlation where you want to provide efficient services, you want to make that experience, you want to use the technology that exists, but we also want to, marketing was a theme that everybody used here. You have to get people interested and let them understand what you do, and then you got to deliver on the services once they do that. There's a corollary, obviously, with the business community. In our situation, we don't want them to be just sitting there interacting with the computer. We want them to get up, get outside, and go experience the outdoors and tell their neighbors and do all of those things. And I'm pretty confident that with particularly the national park situation, we get a pretty good product and that will validate that experience if they get up and get going. And obviously from our perspective, part of it is demographics. We've got to reach out to youth and we've got to try and reconnect them with the outdoors. But we've got a really problem with the demographic information is the very aging set of folks who visit the parks. And so I'm just interested in your experiences of how you get people up and out, and is technology the key aspect of that today, or are there other aspects to it?
So I don't know if this is going to help or not, but one of the 4 prongs of our mission is to train people in CPR and first aid and how to swim and lifeguarding, and there's an element to each of those where you just can't learn it from a computer. So we have a number of distance learning tools now where somebody can learn everything there is about first aid and CPR, but they have to show up to get certified to actually work with the mannequin. And we even have a Learn to Swim app, so they kind of see it, and then they have to go to a pool. So we're using it more like a hook than, at the end of the day, you still have to get in the water, but, you kind of conceptually go, okay, I see what they're going to do, and I get it, and I feel more comfortable. Same thing with babysitting lessons, et cetera, et cetera. At the end, you have to come in and handle the little, mannequin again. But up until that point, you're hooked on the app, and they're entertaining, they're funny. We have one, the babysitter you don't want to have. So they're very engaging for youth, and then they get up and go to the pool.
I don't even come out of the pool.
Yeah. That's one to try. I'm going to try and sort of just switch gears because we've got about 5 minutes left if my clock is running right. So first, thank you, really helpful.
These guys were great.
I wanted to pick up on a couple themes that I heard across some of these and open it up for others, and then I might ask some of our guests here today for some of their parting thoughts for us. And we can also sort of come out of this. I want us to do a little bit of thinking about next steps. Some of this, just in skipping through this, if you go to page 67, which I think is actually the last page here, We'd love to be able to continue this dialogue because we think we have lots to learn. And I also heard some specific topics, and I'm going to focus on the customer service piece. There's also a set of follow-ups in the first part of our conversation, which is our continued dialogue on the parts of the management agenda around efficiency and other elements where we are continuing to work, and so we are continuing to look for your insights. But I heard a couple things here today. I heard about that we might want to think about this mindset of for where technology can help. You think about technology as the default, right? Self-help as the default. And how do you help get, because that's what people want, right? Because it will actually enable people to achieve what they want quicker, better, faster. So how do you start with that mindset and try and migrate people there because it's doable? I think we need to deal with some of the questions where access is hard because of the context of people's work environment, the resources they do and don't have, being sensitive to people with disabilities and finding ways. But you can address all those things, and those are very important to think about. How do you do that? And how do you use the workforce you have to think about, I would frame it this way, as part of their role. Success for them is actually not having that person call them back, but actually finding that way for an individual to get their needs met more efficiently by themselves. That is, in fact, good service. And so I think an ongoing discussion about how we do that practically will be helpful. I heard on the slightly more tactical level, which you may want to follow up with folks on, the ability to leverage both the employee community and the user community as a source of assistance to each other, peer help, whether within a community or not, that's a powerful tool that many of you are using, and maybe a tool that we haven't, in parts of the government, taken advantage of as much in terms of a way to get help and support and help people find the way to navigate through things, again, where that's appropriate. We've also heard, and I would like to come back to this, how do we think about training for remote workforce and finding ways to do that? I think that's another place where specific tangible examples that all of you had with globally diversified workforces, nationally diversified workforces, people who don't spend lots of time at a desk. I think that's a very specific one. And then broadly, this other question about how do we think about who owns customer loyalty within an organization? How do we use the role of a champion? I think we've thought a little bit about that. I know, and we can talk about this in other forums, the role, for example, which came also as part of the GIPR Modernization Act, about a chief performance officer, and that person and the role we've created within those across agencies to say, how do we get people using evidence more? How do we get people using data more? And they've got a mandate across an organization to do that. It's an interesting analogy because it is something that has actually often been added to people's roles, and it takes place differently in each of your agencies because there's a different need, but thinking about something like that may also be helpful. And this question about using peer groups and not just the data, but motivating people to action is another one where I think we'd love to figure out how we can come back and tap into your wisdom, as well as this last piece about specific tangible metrics that are easy to measure. I put in the criteria being easy to measure, inexpensive to measure, and actionable, and understandable. The ability, from my experience, of people to understand what you mean when you say net promoters, like, would you recommend this to a friend, is something that management understands, it's something that customers understand, it's something the workforce understands. You could, and so it can be very helpful because people get it, as opposed to some other things which are amalgam of complicated metrics. And like, it's simple to say to somebody, look, we want people to be able to recommend this as being helpful for whatever they're doing. So those are things that I think are at least some of the themes we've heard, and we'd love to find appropriate ways to follow up and benefit your insights on those couple of dimensions.
Yeah, that was very good summary.
With that, I'd like to turn it over, if you guys have any parting words of wisdom for all of us, that'd be really helpful, and then we will adjourn. And not to too much put you on the spot, but we're going to start with you, Jeff.
Well, I don't have any wisdom, but I think this very discussion and getting a group like this together, with or without us, is just, and I know you do have the council, But, I would encourage you to do something similar with the SES cohort. And, I know that they're all over the country, but, that's what video things are for. But just getting people together to talk about best practices and share and develop connections with each other. It's nice if they can meet once. If you can create some events, and I know you, Steve, do that with the SES group. But I think that's where a lot of best practice sharing can go on, and then have some kind of means of highlighting successes that actually come from somewhere other than the top. So when some relatively mid-level person has a great new idea and has achieved some great best practice, not only whatever you do within the agency to recognize and reward that person, but some platform you may have for communicating across the government will, I think, encourage other people to do it as well. So, but I think, the great news here is there are a ton of best practices, some of which we've heard about today. So I think the opportunity to build on what you guys are already doing is huge.
I don't know if I have any more wisdom left either, but I do want to make an observation, which is every time I come to a PMAB meeting and get to interact with the different parts of the executive branch, I have to say I'm just so impressed with the talent, the passion, the commitment, the desire to serve. And I think it's just great that you're focused on customer service. Just the fact that this is what you're taking on next speaks volumes for how you view your jobs and how the kind of jobs you want to do. So it's a great meeting. Thanks.
Yeah, I would just add, it appears as though there's very, very good progress already being made on what are very difficult problems to solve. I look at your distributed system, and I think, wow, that one seems hard. But it seems like very good progress. I think the one thing, and we talked about this a little bit on the break, it does seem like there's an opportunity to set some audacious goals, not only for around customer service, which will be our forward-going focus, but even around some of the things that we've worked on before. I think some of the GSA areas, there's some opportunities to say, wow, we made it this far, but we can go so much further. So I think that's another opportunity.
That's great, very helpful.
I'll just add a couple things. One, I agree with Gail 100%. It really is inspiring to come here because all the great work that you do is sometimes not very visible. And so for me, every time I leave with half a dozen things I didn't know about, what great progress, and I just wish there were more mechanisms to share it with everybody. That's one thing I would say. The second thing is, the work you're doing on customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, it's a journey, not an event. And there'll be some big potholes in the way, and there'll be reasons why we can't get less people to show up in our brick and mortar locations, right? I mean, when Jeff Bezos created Amazon, right, people were like, really, people are going to move from walking into a bookstore to not. Well, guess what? They have. And so I think this is a long journey, but what you got to do is you got to persevere through it. And folks like us, we are really interested in helping. And please reach out to us. Sometimes we can share something useful, sometimes we can't, but we'd really be happy to help. And we have lots of other folks who would also be happy to participate in the work you're doing because it is important to all of us. So thank you very, very much.
Well, on behalf of my...
Gail?
I guess
Liz?
the only other thing that I would add to the well-deserved recognition is we've been talking a lot about kind of customer service, and as I was thinking about this, you always go to kind of dashboards, customer services, metrics and all of that. And one of the pre-reads that you sent out was, can you pinpoint a series of actions or actions that really help instill customer service? So even though, like you, Beth, I'm a analytics junkie, I have to tell you that whether it's my work on Big Brothers Big Sisters, motivating the Avon sales reps, or the people in the restaurant, the one thing that really can't get lost in this is to hear is for the employees or team members to hear directly from the customers about how their actions, both good and bad, changed their lives and made an impact, right? So when we had a big service issue at Avon, I could put up a million charts, but there was nothing more impactful than having a woman come in and talk about how, she had to disappoint her, X or Y and didn't get her delivery, and she counted on that. And likewise, in the restaurants, is them hearing directly from customers how they made their day and how they really changed what was a horrible situation. So customer service is also about giving your people access to the actual people whose lives they've changed, both in good ways and maybe negative ways. That emotional component is a big part of shifting a culture, and we've really made that available to our employees in the store and helping them to understand how the customers are feeling or how that simple act, turned what was a horrible situation into a positive situation. So I know we're all very data and metric driven, but whether it's, fundraising for Big Brothers Big Sisters, you can show the charts, but nothing's more powerful than having one of the children come in and talk about how their life was changed. So we also, in addition to the metrics, we do an awful lot to create access for our employees to hear directly from customers and about ways they changed their life.
Liz, thank you. I've just added one more item to our follow-up list because I think that you're right. It is incredibly powerful. And for us, as we're here doing this work, I'll say a big thank you on behalf of my colleagues. This issue about touching the lives of people in a specific, tangible way is the goal of the management agenda. It is to deliver what the American people deserve. And I can speak for all of us in the administration. At the last PMC meeting, we were privileged to have a discussion with the president about this and our personal role in making that happen. And there's nothing more than embodying it in the principle of the single individual who you are trying to help, because everybody here every day has such a big impact on people's lives. I think that is a great admonition and inspiration for us to end with. With that, I will say thank you to everybody for joining us today, for the questions, for the comments, for the teams that did all the great work in preparing. A huge thanks. And with that, Steve, I would formally adjourn this meeting unless you tell me there's something else I need to do. There we go. Thank you very much.